Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose tonalist watercolor landscape using just Van Dyke brown. This is the Cotman brand. It's a mixture of, let's see, PBR 7 and PR 101. I'll just put that right there. Whenever I work with the single tube paintings, I often wind up putting out a decent amount of paint and pigment, especially starting with the wet and wet. So in front of me I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I coated it with water. It is 100% cotton, and I don't know if I had said 140-pound cold press, but that's what it is. So let's get to it. We're going to take our medium hake brush, and I'm just going to let my scene create itself. The different brand Van Dykes, or the different brands with their Van Dykes, will have different levels of warmth and different levels of brown. So you could really use any pigment you like, and you'll find over time you'll gravitate towards some for certain feels and towards other ones for different effects. So if you don't have Van Dyke brown, there's no need to go out and run and buy it. You can use burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber. Play around with those guys. Main thing is to learn and see which ones are going to have a drying shift, what values you'll be able to get, how light you can get things, and how dark you can get things. If something's going to stain, if something is going to lift easily. You can see I have a big puddle of water right here. In fact, let me grab some of that. For some weird reason, this piece of paper wasn't torn to the correct size and had some overhang, so I tore some of that back. I'm going to use that small strip for an experiment in another video. Let's see. With these fast and loose paintings and letting the scenes create themselves, excuse me, sometimes you'll find yourself repeating themes and compositions, which is fine. It probably just winds up saying something about you and about yourself and what you like to explore. And then once you start noticing what you're repeating, you can then play around with that concept. And as time progresses, you'll see how you change over time with those. But with this, it's an additive and a subtractive approach. I look at the Tonalist oil painters, Stuart Davies, Dennis Sheehan, and I do it myself with oils from in their style, where the oils will get thinned out and wiped on, wiped back off onto smooth surfaces or linen, and that technique carries over well to watercolor. With these videos, you're always welcome to follow along. You always have my express permission to copy anything that I do and write your own name, sign your own name to it. Sometimes with these fast and loose, it's a little difficult to get the exact thing, so you'll see your own hand take place and you'll start seeing what works for you and what you focus on, and you'll develop your own style very quickly. And of course, sign your name to it. You have my permission to sell anything you do when you follow along. I want you guys to be successful, to have fun, and to have money for art supplies. What I'm doing is putting pigment in this area, but lifting up to reduce that value, just to really rely on atmospheric perspective, where things receding into the picture plane in general will be lighter in tonal value. And as we get closer in the picture plane, things generally will get darker in value. And that's not always the case, but it's easy for these fast and loose experiments to play around with that. If you have cats, like I do, some of their hair will make their way into your painting. You can see a long strand of Hammy's hair right there. And the Hake brushes itself in the beginning will shed. These aren't the Hake brush parts. Now lately I've been playing around with the water-soluble oils. And sometimes I kind of move away from what I'm normally doing, and then I have to come back into those things. So this is kind of a delve back into my normal approach. But every time I do that, there's going to be changes and new things that take place. Kind of like you learn things from other materials. You look at other artists during that time period. You inevitably experiment with different things with the other materials. So that'll happen. You can see how this one really likes to granulate. If you like this channel and you want to support, I have links down below. I have the Patreon where I have a lot of exclusive content. I've been trying to be super regular with exclusive material up there. So there's that. And thank you to everybody that supports me through the Patreon. I really appreciate that. I take that money and turn around and buy more supplies and experiment with different things. So I wouldn't be able to do that without them. You could also send this super thanks if you like. And obviously liking and subscribing helps with video exposure. I'm not sure how the whole algorithm works, but somehow people find these videos, and people comment and seem to enjoy them. I need to go through and respond to some comments. It's been a little while. So right now, at this point, we've just used the fact that the paper is wet. We've used the medium Hake brush just to apply, and the paper towel to kind of wipe and dab back. You can get a variety of textures with the paper towel. You can thin it out and try to pull out some lines with it. You could also explore a lot of different materials for scraping. The back of the fingernail, being that the fingernail is usually rounded, you can pull out some openings or pull some marks. This is probably the least destructive to the paper. The reason I mention that is if you use a cut credit card and the rounded edge, you can start pushing things out in that same fashion. But if you use the cut edge and you make your marks with that, and I'll do it in the foreground, these will usually damage the paper and cause backfills to take place. The paper's quite wet at the moment, so we're not getting too much of wiping back to the white unless you're doing broad strokes like this. But we're still very wet with this. Pulling some foreground ideas. I do have this tool made for me by Mr. Mark, and he specifically designed the edges to mimic the fingernail and the rounded edge of the card. You can also use flat edges of tools like this for wider scrapes. But currently, at this stage in the painting, everything is quite wet, and we're not getting too much of that pushing. So what I'm going to do is explore this time to play around with the #1 rigger, which I haven't really used in this stage in a while. At least I feel like I really haven't used it that much. Where you can go with a wet wash and put that in wet and wet, and that'll diffuse and soften. I am reluctant to pass over these spots where it's already dried, as we'll have the softening and then we'll have that sharper mask, unless I kind of take a different approach and do a more elaborate type inside of a tree and use that softness as if it was the leaves in the field. There was a English painter, Roland Hilder, who painted these amazing trees, and I have a book by him, but it was very introductory and I don't think really went into how he did them. On the Ron Ranson Facebook page, there's Colin Woodward, who seems to have figured out that approach to trees. Anyhow, so with areas that are dry, I'm playing around a little differently. I don't want the value contrast to be too stark back there, especially for the overall vibe of everything that I have. Here's the more wet and wet area where you can really kind of let loose. And I personally had started using this #1 rigger in this fashion, let's say about 4 years ago. I think that's when I was watching Stephen Cronin, and we would put background trees wet and wet like this, do a dry off, put another layer, and he would build up his densities and the depth of painting like that. Stephen Cronin has a YouTube page. He's self-taught. I think a lot of it was from Ron Ranson. Of course, there's David Usher and all the other gentlemen I always mention. Let's see where we're at. I had anticipated the paper to dry a little bit quicker. Reason being is it's right after Christmas, and kind of nationwide we had the freeze and that Arctic blast come down, and all the way down here in Louisiana, I've been having the heat on to kind of help keep the pipes hot to prevent them from freezing, and it's just been like so dry and hot from the heater being on. So I had anticipated, like I said, this drying quicker, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, with this and with fast and loose and all that, you can really play around and have fun and explore different tonal values. One of the things, and I think it's Carlson's guide, but Burge Harrison, I think, mentioned it as well, where as you get darker objects, but they're thinner, so imagine a dark tree, and you have the dark trunk that's thick, and you get to the branches that are thinner, they'll optically appear lighter in value due to the light passing around them. So that's something you can play around with if you want to explore that illusion. Okay, there we go. We're starting to pull the whites out now. So this is with a round edge. You could also explore the hake and its textures. If you find the hake is still wet, you can pull moisture out. So play around on the stage, then we'll pause and we'll do a dry off. Some people like to let it naturally dry. I'm not sure if it really affects it that much using the blow dryer. I have my painting flat, so things wouldn't really move around too much. But if you're painting upright, you could have that gravity flow of the water. If you do hit the paper with the blow dryer and it's pretty wet, it could move particles around. So experiment with that and see what works for you. Let's do our pause and we'll do our dry off. Okay, so it is a little damp to the touch, but you should be able to see the visual characteristics and change after the dry off. We have a tonal shift where things lighten up. In fact, this actually went from kind of a warmer to a cooler look as well. And things are going to change visually through the camera, what brand you use, etc. But with watercolor, as you use it, watch out for those things and be prepared for that softening with the wet and wet stage after drying. You could see where we had started to dry, put heavy application and stayed dark there. In other areas, it had lightened up. When I was talking about damaging the paper and using the sharper edge, here's that sharper edge and it backfilled and it left those marks. I usually try to resist putting them in further background areas, mainly because of that dark does a little too much contrast for me in that background. It's something to play around with and explore and see what works for you. So that being said, I grabbed the number 4 rigger, and these brands that I use, they're the silver black velvet. I had picked them up when I had first started watercoloring. Good price, and came as a recommendation from a YouTube artist, Rick S. And Mr. Rick uses the silver black velvet, and I think for the price and for everything, they're good and easily obtainable. So I've always used that. There's some synthetic brands out there that are cheaper. I think these are synthetic as well. I'm not sure. But anyway, I know in the past we did compare some on this channel, but I know we're like well over 700 videos on the Andrew Broussard watercolor page, so I'm not even sure what we have done before so far. Just playing with this kind of dry brush side effect. It's a stroke that I've seen from a few different master painters, and I'm still learning it, and they make it deceptively simple. There's Alan Owen, who does that side brush with David Usher does it as well. And this is not meant to be condescending. It's almost, you know, a knock on myself, where when I try it, I still find that there's kind of like a childish simplicity to my attempts, where I just cannot match what those masters can do. So it's really interesting seeing them do that, and I think that's just a holdover technique from all the other masters of their time period, of the this would be the 20th century, the British watercolorists. And then of course I mentioned Mr. Henry Lee, a Chinese brush painter who uses that effect, and that's an effect used throughout the Asian arts, known as the I think it's the axe cut, because it looks like the cut of an axe. Just taking a risk with bringing this tree element out. Add some texture, pull this forward in the plane. At this stage in the painting, the hake starts to get pretty dry. I really don't ever add any more water to the hake brush throughout the painting process. But ultimately, that's another thing where it's just, you gotta practice it and play around with it and see what works for you. I want to darken the values on this fella here. We can leave it on that angle. Also add something to kind of bring it up and balance it out. I'm just using that darker application, the darker value, just to help it sit forward comparatively. The same thing here. These guys are good for just some expressive marker making. This is straight from the tube. There we go. A little bit of dry foliage. Let's see how we're looking. Give it a little movement, just light. Let's do a pause and a dry off and see how it looks. I'm gonna go for a compositional switch up. Not a big change, but I want to add something up here. Wonder how loose we can go and just leaving it at that. I put the paint in the middle of the palette, and everything kind of has its place on the palette itself. And if I'm doing something that I don't usually have as part of my color palette, it will sometimes make its way into the center for that one-time painting. But that being said, it's hard for me to just say, okay, I'm done, and then just wipe off and throw away that paint. I've been getting better at that, but it's hard to resist that, if that makes sense. You know. Yeah, we'll use that as our last mark. And we got very expressive with that. So what we'll do now is just simply sign it and end it at that. So I hope you enjoyed. Once again, I have a whole bunch of links down below. Please like, subscribe, follow. I have the Patreon if you would like to support. That really helps out. So thank you to everybody on there. And thank you to everybody that watches and comments. You'll have a great day. Take care. Bye.